Thank you, Ingrid, for that introduction, and thank you, students, for joining us on this cloudy Friday afternoon. We're going to switch gears and talk about animal welfare. But first, of course, let's discuss sustainability, because that's what this symposium is all about. So you might have seen these three pillars before, or if not, you likely will see them in the future, because they're the three main categories or concepts that we often consider when we're talking about sustainable practices. But when I first saw this, I thought, it's a little bit human-centric, right? We're always considering the impacts on us and other people as humans. But as an animal scientist, my question was, well, where do animals fit into this picture? And realistically, you could argue that animals fall into all three categories because they're part of our environment, we have social relationships with them, and they provide economic value, where we buy products for our pets, we purchase tickets for zoos and aquariums to see animals in different attractions, and of course, our farm animals produce products that we purchase and consume on a daily basis. So, if animals are so well integrated into this system, why are we not taking them into bigger consideration when discussing sustainability? And some will argue that, well, animal welfare is actually separate from sustainability, so we have to think of them separately and work on them separately. But I'd argue they're actually so hand in hand that we need to talk about both at the same time. And discuss this a little bit further, how animal welfare fits into sustainability. The first thing is that good animal welfare is something that most people are looking for. We do have respect for animals, regardless of your cultural background, religious background, political views, etc. Most agree that we as people who are caretakers and providers for animals have an innate responsibility to take care of them and do best by them. And that kind of goes along with our interconnected system, where the decisions that we make, whether we want them to or not, usually have direct or indirect impacts on the animals around us. So of course this is something that we need to keep in mind when we're discussing different practices, regardless of whether they're directly related to animals or not. And the other thing that is more emerging is the awareness around both sustainability and animal welfare. When I was younger, there was no such thing as sustainability. That term hadn't been coined yet. And it's more emerging now. And animal welfare was around the same. I had heard of it, but I didn't really know a lot growing up. But now our communities, general public like you guys, are more aware and more involved in what's going on in our welfare practices. And you're more vocal in saying, hey, we see how you're taking care of these animals, and we want different solutions for the problems that are occurring. So there's been a bigger push for both sustainability and animal welfare. And that's actually brought about different products, for example, cage-free eggs, or grass-fed beef, and maybe you've seen these at the store before. If not, keep an eye out for those. But something that I'm always questioning when I'm going into the store is, what about frustrated cow milk versus happy cow milk? You seen that yet? No, definitely not. And that's because when we were discussing these first two products at the top, we were talking about the health of the animal, the physical well-being. We wanted to stop them from having pain and suffering. But now mental health is becoming something that we're more accepting of and more aware of, but not as much for animals. And my question is, well, why not? It should be just as important for their welfare as it is for ours. So that, of course, brings me to my research. And I work on animal emotion, which does have an impact on the animal's mental well-being. And I specifically work on frustration and a few other concepts, but we'll talk about frustration for this talk. And frustration is a highly negative emotion that animals can experience when they're motivated for something. So either they want to interact with something, or maybe they want to escape and get away because they're uncomfortable or afraid. So they're motivated for something, they have an expectation of what's going to happen, and if that expectation isn't met, that can cause frustration, which is highly upsetting for the animal and can decrease their welfare. And how they show that is the same way that we do with their behavior, but of course they have a different biology and physiology than we do, so the behaviors they perform are not going to be the same. So when we're trying to understand how the animal is experiencing these emotions, we can look at their behavior because it's the most direct, the easiest, and the least invasive way to understand what they're experiencing up here. And we can do a variety of different tests. One that I thought was really interesting was this unsolvable task, or the impossible task, where you train the animal to do a certain task in order to receive a reward, and then once they've learned to do that, you make it impossible for them, and then that induces frustration, and then we can see what behaviors result. So for example, in dogs, we've trained them to flip over this little container for the treat underneath, and once they've learned to do that, you glue the container to the board and they can't physically push it over anymore, and that causes them to be frustrated, and you can record what behaviors they do during that time. And these researchers have actually started to try to categorize how dogs might show frustration. But of course, I don't work with dogs. I work with cows, who are kind of like big dogs in their own right. And I work with dairy cows specifically because in Canada, they're often kept in what's called tie stall systems. And a tie stall basically means that the animal is tethered or attached to the stall for most of their production cycle. So they're stuck in one area where they can't move around. And of course, that can potentially be frustrating because they don't get to go outside, experience the weather, interact with other animals. So my research question was, well, how does being denied the opportunity to go outside impact their emotion? And I specifically wanted to know if we provided different frequencies of going outside, will that reduce their frustration, increase it? I didn't know. So how I looked at this was I split my animals into two groups. I had one cow group that went outside 3 times a week in red, and I had another cow group that went outside once a week in blue. And what we did was train the cows to know that it was time to go outside. So we put different signals in front of them to help them learn that this was the process. For example, we put down halters in front of them, we opened the door to the outside, there was a lot of activity bustling around in the farm, so it started to signal to them to prepare themselves to go outside. Then we would bring one treatment group out and leave the other ones in the farm, and we would record them while they were in the barn to see if they showed frustration. This is some of our results here, where we have graphed our 2 different treatment groups based on the first, middle, and last week of the trial, and then we have the average duration of the frustration behavior on the side. And what we found was that the group that went outside 3 times a week performed more frustration behavior for longer periods than the one day a group week. And we also found that cows from both groups had a decrease in their frustration over time. So you're probably thinking, that's not what you're expecting, at least that's not what I was expecting, but let me try to explain this for you. So the group that went outside 3 times a week were being rewarded more often than the group that went outside once a week. So what I think happened is that these animals had higher expectation to go outside, so the one time a week where they were told, no, you can't, it was highly frustrating for them. And the way I can explain this to you is if every single day your mom gave you a piece of cake, by Friday, if she says, oh, no cake today, you're going to be really upset because you're expecting that piece of cake. Versus if she just randomly gave you a piece of cake one day a week, by Friday, you're not going to have any expectation for it, so you're probably not going to be frustrated when she says there's no cake. We also saw that both groups decreased in their frustration over time, and that was really surprising for me because I expected that they would stay highly frustrated every time they're denied the opportunity to go outside. But what I think happened is that the cows were not enjoying feeling frustrated, so they were able to compensate by lowering their motivation and lowering their expectations for the outdoor area, and thus, as time went on, they were able to decrease their frustration. However, I think if we continued this trial for longer, we wouldn't see frustration completely disappear because there's always some innate motivation to go outside. I think more so it would just remain at a steady state. But overall, what am I trying to get at here? We should not deny animals the opportunity to do things that they enjoy. If they're motivated for something, they want to have access to it, and we deny them that opportunity, it can cause negative emotions which negatively impact their overall welfare. So we should allow them to do things that they are motivated for. And something that actually my work and others have helped to change in Canada is that just last year we had a new code of practice for the handling of dairy cattle put out. And the code of practice basically dictates what farmers can and can't do in terms of taking care of their animals. So this new code states that by 2027, so just a few years away, farmers cannot continuously tether, so keep their animals attached to the stall for their whole production cycle, and they have to have some opportunity for movement, and they actually recommend 50 hours of outdoor access per month, which is a lot considering the recommended practice before was 0. So this is a really big, really important change that we've had in Canada. It's something that I'm very excited about. And you might not have seen this product in the stores just yet, but I hope with this change it becomes the new standard and that we have these products that say, yes, cows are outside, they're happy, they're healthy, they're not being denied that opportunity, so they're not as frustrated. So keep your eyes out, maybe you'll see some happy cow milk soon. Thank you.